They won't let my mommy in, please. Somebody help her. She can't breathe. A 7-year-old girl, barefoot, screaming at the top of her lungs outside a hospital, while grown men in uniform stood at the door and did nothing. Her mother was dying on the pavement, and not a single person stopped walking until the ground started to shake. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and follow every single part until the very end. Drop a comment and tell me what city are you watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The afternoon sun over Phoenix, Arizona on that particular Tuesday in late July did not care about mercy. It never did. It pressed down on everything on the cracked sidewalks, on the rooftops, on the strip of asphalt outside St. Vincent Medical Center, like a hand pushing the whole city flat against the ground. Heat rose off the pavement in visible waves, the kind that made the air look liquid, the kind that turned a 10-minute walk into something that could kill an older person or a sick one. Sarah Carter had been sick for 3 weeks. She hadn't told her daughter how bad it had gotten. That was the first thing you needed to understand about Sarah. She did not tell people things. Not because she was dishonest, but because she had spent the better part of her 34 years on this earth learning that telling people things didn't change them. You told your landlord the heat wasn't working, and the heat still didn't work. You told your supervisor you were exhausted, and they still put you on the double shift. You told the doctor you couldn't afford the follow-up appointment, and they handed you a pamphlet and smiled. So Sarah kept things to herself. She kept the pain to herself, the fever that spiked every night and soaked through her sheets, the swelling in her left arm that had started as a small red mark and had grown over 3 weeks into something that radiated heat and throbbed in a way that made her teeth clench. She kept the dizziness to herself and the nausea in the mornings when she stood at the kitchen sink holding the edge of the counter because the room wouldn't stop tilting. She kept all of it from Emily. Emily was 7 years old, blonde, missing one front tooth, and the most observant human being Sarah had ever met. Children that age weren't supposed to notice everything. Emily noticed everything. "Mommy, your arm looks worse today," Emily had said that morning, standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, her eyes hazel sharp, just like her father's had been before he left, fixed on the bandage Sarah had rewrapped around her forearm the night before. "It's fine, baby," Sarah said, not turning around from the sink. "Go get dressed. It's red outside the bandage." "Emily, it is Mommy." "Ahoy, I can see it." Sarah turned. She looked at her daughter, this small, serious person standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, and she felt something move in her chest that had nothing to do with the infection. "I'm going to be fine," she said. "I promise. Now go get dressed. We have to leave in 20 minutes. Emily didn't move for a long moment. She just kept looking. Then she said very quietly, "You said that yesterday too." Sarah had no answer for that. She turned back to the sink. She had been planning to go to the clinic on her day off Thursday. She just needed to get through Tuesday and Wednesday at the warehouse, 2 more shifts, and then she would go. She had already budgeted for it. She had the forms they'd need. She had a plan. The body does not always wait for plans. At 11:47 that morning, Sarah was in the break room at the warehouse, eating half a granola bar because her stomach had been too unsettled for a real meal when the room went sideways. Not metaphorically, the walls actually moved. The fluorescent light above her swung or seemed to swing, and then her knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of the plastic table and she heard someone saying her name from very far away. "Sarah, Sarah, hey, Sarah, can you hear me?" She heard it. She just couldn't answer right away. There was a sound like water filling her ears, and the granola bar was still in her hand, and she was sitting on the floor without remembering how she got there. Her coworker, Denise, was crouched in front of her, both hands on Sarah's shoulders, her face wide and frightened. "Oh my God! Oh my God, you're burning up! Sarah, you are on fire!" "I'm okay," Sarah said. The words came out, wrong, thick, slow. I stood up too fast." "You didn't stand up. You fell down," Denise said. "I'm calling 911. "No," Sarah reached for her arm. "No, Denise, please don't. I can't, the copay, I can't." "Honey, you are not arguing with me about money right now. I have to pick up Emily at 3. I have to, Denise, please." Denise called 911. Sarah talked her out of it before the dispatcher answered, which she would later consider one of the worst decisions she ever made. She convinced Denise it was dehydration. She drank 2 glasses of water, sat in the break room for 40 minutes, And then because Sarah Carter was the kind of woman who could talk herself into almost anything, when she was desperate enough, she drove herself home. She should not have driven. She knew that by the time she pulled out of the parking lot. The steering wheel felt wrong under her hands, too light, too far away, and the traffic signals took a second longer than they should have to make sense to her. She drove slowly. She made it home. Emily was there. School had let out at 3, and the neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, had brought her back and let herself out with the spare key, leaving a note on the kitchen table that said, "Called twice, call me back, your girl ate a snack." She's fine. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework when Sarah came through the door, and she looked up and she did not say anything. She just looked. "Hey, baby," Sarah said, aiming for normal and landing somewhere around barely upright. "How was school?" Emily stood up. She walked across the kitchen and stood in front of her mother and looked at her the way a doctor looks at a patient, systematically, without sentimentality, taking inventory. Then she said, "Mommy, you have to go to the hospital." "Emily, your face is gray." "I'm just tired." "Your lips are gray too, and you're sweating and it's not even hot in here." "Emily, sweetheart." "I'm not being dramatic," Emily said, and her voice was steady in a way that should not have been possible from a 7-year-old's throat, steady and quiet and absolutely serious. "You're scaring me. You have been scaring me for 3 days, and I haven't said anything because you told me not to worry. But Mommy, I am worried, and you need to go to the hospital right now." Sarah looked at her daughter. She looked at those hazel eyes, wide and frightened, and trying so hard not to show how frightened they were, and something in her chest cracked open. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, we'll go." She did not expect what came next. She had pictured it as a simple thing, a car ride, a waiting room, a doctor, maybe an IV, maybe a prescription, and then home. She had not considered what would happen if her body simply stopped cooperating before they could get through the door. She made it to the car. She made it out of the neighborhood and onto the main road. She made it 3/4 of the way to St. Vincent Medical Center before the world went white at the edges and the steering wheel became impossible to hold. "Mommy," she pulled over. She did not remember pulling over, but she must have because the car was stopped halfway up on a curb, engine still running. Emily was screaming her name. Sarah was trying to answer. The words were inside her, she could feel them, but her mouth wouldn't form them, and her hands wouldn't lift, and there was a sound in her ears that she couldn't identify, low and rushing, like standing too close to a highway. "Mommy, wake up! Mommy, please! Mommy!" Emily unbuckled her seatbelt. She opened the passenger door and climbed out. She was wearing sneakers with a broken lace on the left one, the blue ones with the star on the side, and the pavement was so hot she could feel it through the soles. The hospital was 2 blocks away. She could see the sign from where she was standing. She had never felt so small in her life. "Help!" Her voice came out thin. Nobody turned. A man walked by talking on his phone. A woman in scrubs crossed the street without looking at her. "Help, my mommy can't wake up. Please, somebody help." A teenager glanced over, kept walking. Emily ran back to the car. Her mother had slumped sideways against the window. Her breath coming in shallow, uneven pulls her arm, the bad arm lying across her lap with the bandage half unraveled and the skin beneath it red and swollen and deeply wrongly colored. Emily took her mother's good hand in both of her own and squeezed as hard as she could. "Stay with me, Mommy. Okay, stay with me. I'm gonna get help." She kissed her mother's hand. Then she turned and ran. She ran toward the hospital. She was fast. She had always been fast. Fastest girl in her 2nd grade class. Her teacher said so, and she covered the 2 blocks in less time than it should have taken a 7-year-old, her sneakers slapping the sidewalk, her lungs burning, her blonde hair flying out behind her. She hit the hospital entrance at full speed and stopped cold. 3 men stood between the automatic doors and the world outside. They were not doctors. They were not nurses. They wore gray shirts and badges that said contracted security on them, and they were large, and they were standing with their arms crossed in the way that people stand when they have decided in advance that nothing coming toward them is their problem. Emily looked up at them, out of breath, tears already starting. "Please," she managed. "My mommy's in the car." She collapsed. "She needs help right now." The one in the middle, heavy set with a lanyard that held too many key cards, looked down at her. "Does she have insurance?" Emily stared. "What insurance? Does she have a current insurance card?" She's sick. We can't admit patient is without verifying coverage, the man said, not unkindly, but with the flatness of someone repeating a rule they've recited 100 times and stopped questioning long ago. If you bring her to the window, someone can check the system. She can't walk. That's what I'm telling you, Emily's voice cracked. She's in the car. She needs a wheelchair or a stretcher or something. Ma'am, the second guard, younger, a patchy beard, sunglasses he hadn't bothered to take off, held up a hand. You need to calm down. She's dying. She's probably not dying. People say that a lot. She is. Her arm is really bad and she can't wake up all the way and her lips are gray. Look, kid. The third one spoke now and he had his phone in his hand. Actually had his phone out and angled toward the street, filming something or pretending to. The protocol is the protocol. There's nothing we can do until she's at the window. Then come to the car with me, please, please. I'll take you right there. She's 2 blocks away. We can't leave the entrance. Emily stood on the burning pavement in front of those 3 men, and she understood in the particular way that children understand things completely without the protective buffer of disbelief that adults build up over years, that they were not going to help her. They had the power to help her, and they were not going to use it. The realization hit her like something physical. She had never understood before that moment what it felt like to be truly abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect you. She started to cry. Not the crying she'd been doing before, the frightened crying, the desperate crying. This was different. This was the crying of someone who had run as hard as they could and found nothing at the end of the run. Please, she whispered, she's all I have. The man with the sunglasses looked away. The one with the phone kept filming. The heavy-set one in the middle sighed, shifted his weight and said, I'm sorry, but they won't let my mommy in. The scream tore out of her before she even knew it was coming. Raw, huge. It echoed off the building front and carried down the street in both directions, and people stopped, actually stopped and stared. A woman with a stroller put her hand over her mouth. An old man at the bus stop stood up straighter. A teenager pulled out an earbud. Emily stood there, chest heaving, fists at her sides, staring up at those 3 men with tears pouring down her face and her whole body trembling with the effort of the scream she just let out. Somebody help her! Please, they won't let my mommy in the hospital. People looked. A few stepped closer. One woman started walking toward her with concern on her face and her phone in her hand. But nobody stepped in front of those 3 men. Nobody challenged them. The contractors stood their ground with the infuriating confidence of people who have learned that institutional authority, even petty borrowed institutional authority, almost always wins. The woman with the phone was saying something. Honey, honey, come here, tell me what's happening. And Emily was repeating her mother's location. The car, 2 blocks. The star sneakers, the collapsed. The gray lips, the arm, the fever. And the woman was nodding and dialing and saying, I'm calling an ambulance, okay? I'm calling, so... When the sound started, at first it was nothing. A bass note almost too low to hear, more felt than listened to. A vibration in the sternum. The old man at the bus stop looked up from his phone. The woman with the stroller turned her head. Then it became something. Engines. Multiple overlapping, building on each other, the way a storm builds. Not a single thunderclap, but a gathering, a rolling, and approach. The sound filled the street from the west and kept coming, and it was big, and it was unmistakable, and it was getting louder by the second. Emily didn't know what it was yet. She was still talking to the woman with the phone, still trying to explain where her mother was still crying, but something in the vibration made her look up from the pavement. Down the road, past the intersection, past the bus stop, past everything that had failed to help her, 5 motorcycles appeared. Black, chrome, low and heavy and wide, taking up space the way certain things take up space, not aggressively, but as a simple fact of their existence. They moved together without looking like they were trying to move together, the loose coordination of people who have ridden alongside each other for years and don't need to think about it anymore. The man at the front was visible even at that distance. Something about him was just visible. The breadth of his shoulders, the way he rode without leaning forward, no hurry, no performance, just presence. A leather vest over a dark shirt. Gray threaded through dark hair at his temples. Emily stared. The motorcycles turned into the hospital approach. They rolled toward the entrance slowly, the sound of them filling everything, and one by one they stopped, not in the parking lot, not in a designated space, but right there at the edge of the entrance, engine by engine, going quiet until the last one cut out, and the silence that followed felt enormous. The man from the front stepped off his motorcycle. He was tall, not dramatically tall, but tall in the way that seems to expand as a person gets closer to you, the kind of tall that has gravity. He had a beard going mostly gray, and eyes that moved over a situation the way a doctor's hands move over an injury methodically without rushing, taking in exactly what needed to be taken in. He took in Emily first, then the three men at the door, then Emily again. She was still crying. She was looking at him the way she had looked at those three guards with the same desperate calculation. Does this person have power? And if they have power, will they use it? But there was something different in this man's face. Not warmth exactly. Not yet. Just the absence of indifference. He walked toward her. His boots on the pavement made a sound that was somehow separate from the ambient noise of the street, clear and deliberate, each step its own statement. He crouched down in front of her. He was a big man, getting small to meet a small person, and the effort of it, the simple physical courtesy of it, made Emily's crying hitch and slow. "Hey," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. "Tell me what's happening." Emily looked at him. At the patch on his vest, the wings, the letters. She had seen those letters on TV before. She didn't fully understand what they meant. She just knew his eyes were looking straight at her, and he was waiting for her answer. "My mommy," she said. "She's in the car. She collapsed. She can't walk. And those men," she pointed at the door without looking at either of them, "they won't let her in. They keep asking about insurance. And I don't know what to say. And she's really sick. And her arm is so bad. And she's all gray. And I..." The words broke. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and took one shaking breath and then said the simplest version of everything. "She needs help and nobody will help her." The man looked at her for one more second. Then he stood up. He turned toward the three contractors, and in the process of turning, something in the air changed. It was not theatrical. He didn't roll his shoulders or set his jaw in any particular way. He just turned, and the four other men who had been standing by the motorcycles were suddenly no longer standing by the motorcycles. They were standing behind him, spread slightly present, saying nothing. He walked to the door. The heavy-set one started. "Sir, I'm going to need..." "Where is she?" he said. Not loudly, not aggressively. He spoke to the heavy-set man the way you speak to someone who is in the way of something that is going to happen regardless. "Sir, protocol." "Where?" He looked at Emily. "Show me." Emily took 3 running steps toward the street, then looked back to make sure he was coming. He was. The other 4 were behind him. The 3 contractors were still standing at the door, but they were not in his way anymore. They had moved, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way water moves around a stone, without acknowledgement, without ceremony, as if the possibility of doing otherwise had simply ceased to exist. Emily ran, and the man in the leather vest followed her. Behind them, the hospital entrance stood open. The 3 contractors looked at each other. The one with the phone had put it away. The one with the sunglasses took them off. Nobody said a word. 2 blocks away, in a car with the engine still running and the left wheel up on a curb, Shira Carter lay against a window, with her breath coming in shallow, shuddering pulls, live still barely waiting for someone to find her. She had no idea who was coming. She had no idea that the person running ahead of them, a 7-year-old girl in sneakers with a broken lace, had just done something that grown adults couldn't manage. She had stood in front of cruelty, and she had screamed until the street vibrated, and the street had answered. Emily ran like she had never run before in her life, and the man behind her ran too, not the desperate stumbling run of someone unprepared, but the long, ground-eating stride of a man who had moved fast in difficult situations before and knew how to do it without burning out before he got there. Behind him, his 4 riders followed without being told. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. 2 blocks felt like 2 miles when you were 7 years old and your mother was at the other end of them. "There!" Emily screamed, pointing. "That's our car, the white one." She reached it first. She yanked on the passenger door handle. It was already unlocked. She'd left it that way, and the door swung open and she pressed herself against her mother's shoulder. Mommy, Mommy, I brought somebody. Mommy, please open your eyes. Sarah's eyes opened. Not all the way. Halfway. The kind of halfway that looks like someone swimming up from a very deep place, working hard for the surface. Her lips moved. I'm here. I'm right here. The man in the leather vest reached the car. He took one look. One look was all he needed, and he turned his head and said to the man immediately behind him, a broad-shouldered rider named Dex, who had medic training from 2 tours in the Army, "Talk to me." Dex was already crouching beside the open door, his eyes moving over Sarah the way a trained person's eyes move fast, practice cataloging. He took her wrist between his fingers. He looked at the arm. He leaned in close to listen to her breathing. He stood up and looked at Jack, Callaway Reaper, and said one word: sepsis. The word landed like a stone in still water. Jack had heard that word before. He knew what it meant. He knew what it did to people when they waited too long. He also knew in the way that men who have spent decades moving through hard situations develop a sixth sense for these things, that they did not have time for another argument at a door. "We carry her," he said. Jack, Dex started. "If we wait for an ambulance, she could seize. We are 2 blocks from the door. We carry her." Dex didn't argue again. He was already moving. "Emily," Jack said, and the little girl looked up at him from her mother's side, her face wet, her eyes enormous. "I need you to step back 2 steps and let us work. Can you do that?" She didn't want to. Every part of her body resisted the idea of stepping away from her mother. But something in the steadiness of his voice, not kind exactly, not the false, soft kindness that adults sometimes use with children when they wanted them out of the way, but direct, genuine, treating her like a person capable of understanding a real request, made her listen. She took 2 steps back. Jack leaned into the car. He got one arm behind Sarah's back and one under her knees, and he lifted her the way you lift something that matters, carefully, fully, not halfway. Sarah made a sound, a small, involuntary sound, the kind that comes when pain finds a voice even in unconsciousness. "I've got you," Jack said quietly. Not to anyone in particular, just into the air near Sarah's ear. "You're okay. We're moving." Emily fell into step beside them. She reached up without thinking and wrapped her hand around 2 of Jack's fingers, the ones hanging at the end of the arm under Sarah's knees, and she held in and he let her, and they moved. The 4 other riders spread out around them on the sidewalk, not blocking anyone but occupying space, creating a corridor. People stopped and stared. A few pulled out phones. One man jogged ahead to hold and open the door of a coffee shop they were passing, confused about what he was seeing, but responding to the urgency of it anyway. Jack didn't slow down. Dex moved alongside him, monitoring Sarah's breathing, one hand on her wrist. "Her pulse is fast and weak," Dex said. "I know. Jack, this arm, she's been fighting this for a while. This isn't a day thing." "I know. She's going to need IV antibiotics, probably a central line." "Dex," Jack's voice was quiet but final. "Tell me what she needs when we're inside. Right now, just walk." The hospital entrance appeared ahead of them. The 3 contractors were still there. Same positions, same postures, same borrowed authority, except that when they saw what was coming toward them, something shifted. The heavy-set one straightened. The one who had been filming put both hands at his sides. The youngest one took 1 step backward, then seemed to realize he'd done it and forced himself to stop. Jack did not slow down. He walked straight at the entrance, and the automatic doors opened, and the heavy-set contractor stepped directly into his path and said, "Sir, I need you to stop. Bim, she has sepsis." Jack said it flat, without any drama, the way you say something that ends a conversation. "If you put your hands on me or this woman, I will set her down, I will deal with you, and I will pick her up again. Your choice." 3 seconds of silence. The contractor stepped aside. Jack walked through the doors. The interior of the hospital hit him cold air. Antiseptic, the controlled chaos of a busy ER, and he didn't stop moving. He walked straight to the nurse's station, a wide curved desk with 2 nurses behind it, and he said to the woman closest to him, a broad-faced woman in her 50s named Rena, whose name tag he clocked in half a second. "This woman needs immediate attention. Her name is Sarah Carter. She has a severe infection in her left arm, probably sepsis, pulse is fast and weak. She's been semi-conscious for at least 30 minutes. Her 7-year-old daughter is with her. Nurse Rena looked up from her screen. She looked at Sarah in Jack's arms. She looked at Jack. She looked at Emily standing at his side with her hand still wrapped around his fingers. She stood up. "Bay 3, she said. "Bring her back now." She was already reaching for the phone on her desk, already dialing, already saying into the receiver, "I need a physician in Bay 3 immediately possible. Septic patient, adult female. I need a tray, and I need it ready. Let's go." Jack carried Sarah through the door that Rena held open for them and laid her on the narrow hospital bed in Bay 3 with the same care he'd used to pick her up. Sarah's eyes came partway open again when she felt the mattress beneath her. She turned her head slowly, searching. "Emily," she said. The word was barely there. "I'm here, Mommy." Emily pushed forward and took her mother's hand before anyone could redirect her. "I'm right here. They're going to help you now." "What?" Sarah blinked. Her eyes moved around the bay, unfocused. "What happened? How did we—" "I got help," Emily said simply. Sarah looked at her daughter. Something passed across her face, relief, exhaustion, love of the particular variety that only exists between a parent and a child who has just done something astonishing, and then she let her eyes close again, giving herself over to the machinery of care that was now moving around her. The doctor arrived 40 seconds later. Young fast, a man named Dr. Okafor, who took one look at the arm and said quietly to the nurse already cutting away the bandage, "How long has this been like this?" Rena looked at Emily. Emily looked at the doctor. 3 weeks, she said. She kept saying it was fine. Dr. Okafor nodded once, the nod of someone filing information. He said to the room, "I want blood cultures, C, B, C, C, M, lactate, blood pressure, every 5 minutes. Get me a line in her right arm and let's talk about pressors. If that pressure is where I think it is." He was already snapping on gloves. He looked at Emily. "You her daughter?" "Yes, sir." "You did the right thing getting her here. You understand me, exactly the right thing." He held her eyes for a moment longer than necessary, long enough for it to mean something, then turned back to his patient. Jack had stepped back to the edge of the bay. He stood there the way men stand when they are deliberately making themselves smaller. Weight back, arms loose, giving space. Dex was beside him. "She's in the right place," Dex said quietly. "Yeah. That arm has probably been brewing for 2 weeks at minimum. Maybe longer." Jack said nothing. "She's lucky the kid got to us," Dex said. Jack looked at Emily. She was standing at the head of the bed, holding her mother's hand in both of hers, talking to her in a low murmur. Not asking anything, not demanding a response, just talking, filling the space around her mother with the sound of her voice, the way a lighthouse fills a dark coastline with light. Just saying over and over in different words, "You are not alone. Stay." Something moved across Jack Calloway's face that he would not have been able to name and would not have tried to. He had seen a lot of things in his 49 years. He had been in situations that would have broken other men. He had developed over decades the particular emotional armor that men in difficult lives develop, not cruelty, not indifference, but a certain distance from feeling the ability to observe without being destabilized. Emily destabilized him, not because she was dramatic, not because she cried, but because she was so completely, uncomplicatedly focused on her mother. There was nothing in her that was performing, nothing that was managing how she appeared. She was just a child who loved her parent and was terrified of losing her and was doing every single thing within her power to prevent it. He had not seen that kind of uncalculated love in a long time. He turned and walked back through the door. Outside the bay in the corridor, one of his riders, Marcus, the oldest of them, silver-bearded, a man who had known Jack for 23 years, fell into step beside him without asking. That was the thing about men who had ridden together for decades. They moved in each other's orbits the way planets did without negotiation. "Contractors are still at the front door," Marcus said. "I know. One of them filmed it, the whole thing, kid crying us walking in." Jack stopped walking. He turned to look at Marcus. "Filmed it for what purpose?" he said. Marcus shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be their security protocol. Could be something else." Jack stood still for a moment. Then he said, "Get Danny to check that they're not doing anything with it that puts that woman's face on the internet without her consent." "Danny's outside." "Then go outside and tell Danny." Marcus went. Jack stood in the corridor alone for 30 seconds. He was looking at the wall. He was not seeing the wall. He was seeing Emily on the pavement outside barefoot on burning asphalt, screaming until her voice cracked. He was seeing the contractor with his phone out angled, filming a child in crisis like it was content. He was seeing the moment the heavy-set one said the word protocol to a 7-year-old girl whose mother was dying in a car 2 blocks away. He had been angry before in his life. Deep, cold, structural anger, the kind that doesn't shout and doesn't shake because it doesn't need to, the kind that simply decides. This was that kind. He turned and walked back toward the front entrance. The heavy-set contractor saw him coming. To his credit, he held his ground. He had made a decision somewhere in the last 15 minutes that he was not going to be the man who crumbled twice, and you could see it in the way he squared his shoulders, the way he lifted his chin. It didn't matter. Jack stopped in front of him and said very quietly, "The woman inside, what you did or didn't do out here today. You're going to have to carry that." The contractor, we were following. "I know what you were following. That's not what I'm talking about." Jack looked at him steadily. "I'm talking about what it felt like, standing there, watching that little girl scream. I'm asking if you're going to be able to sleep with it." A pause, something flickered in the contractor's face. Not guilt exactly, not yet, maybe not ever, but the beginning of something adjacent to it. An awareness that things had happened here that would not be easy to file away. "I have a job to do," the man said. "You had a child in front of you," Jack said. "That's not a job, that's a human being." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. Then he said, "I hope you figure out the difference before the next one." He turned and walked back inside. By the time he returned to the bay, things had escalated in exactly the way Dex had predicted and Jack had feared. Sarah's blood pressure had come back dangerously low. The word he heard through the half-open curtain was septic shock, spoken in the flat clinical tone of people who use frightening words constantly and have learned to drain the fear out of them, not because the fear isn't warranted, but because fear doesn't help you move fast. They were moving fast. There were 3 people around Sarah's bed now, a nurse on each side and the doctor at the head, and the machines were making sounds that machines make when they are working hard, and Emily was not inside the bay anymore. She was in the corridor. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, and her knees pulled up to her chest and her face pressed against her knees, and she was very still. Not crying, just still. Jack sat down beside her. Not on a chair, not a few feet away on the floor next to her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. She didn't look up. He didn't say anything. For a long time, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5, they just sat there. Around them, the hospital moved feet on linoleum loudspeaker announcements, someone's family crying quietly in a waiting room down the hall. The sounds of a place where the distance between living and dying was measured in minutes and decisions. Emily lifted her face from her knees. Her eyes were dry. She had gone somewhere beyond immediate crying into the territory of a fear so large it had become quiet. "Is she going to die?" she said. Jack looked at her. He did not insult her with an automatic no. He did not perform certainty he didn't have. He said, "The doctors here are working very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. And she's in the right place. She wouldn't be in the right place if it weren't for you." Emily thought about that. "But you carried her." "You ran," he said. "I just walked." She considered this with the seriousness of a child doing real arithmetic. Then she said, "Why did you help us?" It was such a direct question, the kind only children asked because children hadn't yet learned to assume that the reasons people do things are complicated or hidden or not worth asking about. Jack looked at the floor for a moment. Then he said, "Because you asked. Those other people didn't help, and I asked them too." "Yeah," he said, "I know." "Why is it different?" He thought about that. He thought about 29 years of writing of the particular philosophy that had developed along those miles, the code that people from the outside always misunderstood because they saw only the surface of it, the leather, the noise, the reputation. They didn't see the underneath of it, the loyalty, the particular absolute commitment to not looking away when looking away was the easier choice. Because some people look at a problem, he said slowly, and they look for a reason why it's not their problem. And some people just see the problem. He paused. "I've spent a long time trying to be the second kind." Emily looked at him. She had the eyes of a child who was taking in something larger than its container, storing it away for when she had more room to hold it. What's your name? She said. Jack. My name is Emily. I know, you told me outside. She had no memory of it. I don't remember that. That's okay, you were busy. Something in her face shifted, not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, the slight softening at the corners of her mouth that in a child is the earliest warning sign of a smile returning. You're kind of scary looking, she said. No offense, Jack looked at her. None taken. But you don't feel scary. Good, he said. She leaned sideways and rested her head against his arm very gently, the way a tired child leans against something solid, not dramatically, not seeking permission, just because her body had been running on pure adrenaline for hours and it had finally run out. Jack went still. He did not move his arm. He sat there and let her lean and stared at the opposite wall. Down the hall, the machines kept their rhythm. In Bay 3, Dr. Okafor was fighting hard for a woman he had never met, doing the work that the men at the door had nearly made impossible. Outside through the hospital's glass front, 4 motorcycles sat in a loose cluster and 3 men from the Hells Angels stood near them in the heat saying nothing to each other, watching the entrance waiting without being asked to wait. And in the corridor, a little girl with broken lace sneakers and a man who had been called a lot of things in his life sat together on a linoleum floor, and the air between them was filled with the particular silent gravity of 2 people who had run toward the same hard thing and come out the other side of it changed. Neither of them noticed when Nurse Rena walked past, looked at them, and stopped. She stood there for a moment with her clipboard held against her chest, taking in the picture, the big man in leather and the tiny girl side by side on the floor's shoulder against arm, and something moved across her face that was old and complicated. The expression of a woman who had worked 20 years in an emergency room and thought she had cataloged every possible version of human behavior and kept finding new ones. She almost said something. Then she didn't. She turned and walked back to her station, and she thought about it for the rest of her shift. And when her daughter called her that night, she told her the story, and she cried a little at the part about the floor, and her daughter said, "Mom, are you okay?" And Raina said, "I'm fine. I just want you to know that there are still good people. I need you to know that." Back in Bay 3, Dr. Okafor looked up from his patient. Her blood pressure had moved still low, but moving in the right direction. The lactate was what he'd feared. The arm was what he'd feared, but she was responding. He exhaled once. Then he said to the nurse beside him, "Let's talk about the next 2 hours." And he rolled up his sleeves and he kept going. Sarah Carter did not know any of this yet. She was somewhere between consciousness and its absence, held in place by medication and machinery and the accumulated effort of everyone who had refused to let her slip away. But somewhere in the suspended quiet of that space, she could hear something. She couldn't identify it exactly. It sounded like her daughter's voice, saying her name, over and over like a rope she could hold. She held it. Rana had been at her station for 11 minutes when the man came through the front doors. Not a patient, not a visitor. She could tell within 3 seconds, 20 years behind, that desk had given her a taxonomy of everyone who walked through an emergency room entrance, and this man belonged to none of the usual categories. He was mid-40s, wearing a pressed button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, carrying a leather portfolio that was too neat, too deliberate, the kind of accessory that announced itself. He moved with the particular purposefulness of someone who had prepared for this moment in advance. He walked straight to her station and set the portfolio on the counter and said, "I'm looking for a patient, Sarah Carter. She was brought in approximately 40 minutes ago." Rena looked at him. "Are you family?" "I'm her employer's representative," he said. "Regional HR. I need to speak with her about some documentation before—" "She's in the middle of emergency treatment," Rena said flatly. "I understand that, but there are some insurance-related forms that need to be—" "Sir." Rena put both hands flat on the desk. She had a way of doing this, a stillness, a weight that had stopped larger and louder men than this one mid-sentence. "Whatever documentation you have can wait. She is not available. She will not be available for the foreseeable future. If you'd like to leave your contact information, someone will be in touch." The man paused. He recalibrated. He said, "The issue is that her coverage has a 72-hour verification window, and if we can't confirm employment status before—" "Are you saying," Rena said slowly, "that you came here to question whether this woman's insurance is valid while she is in septic shock in Bay 3?" Silence. Because if that is what you're saying, Rena continued, her voice dropping half a register in a way that was more threatening than any increase in volume could have been, I need you to turn around, walk back out those doors, and make that phone call from somewhere that isn't my emergency room. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed his portfolio. Then he said very carefully, I'm just doing my job. So am I, Rena said. Mine matters more right now. He left. Rena watched him go. She stood at her station until the automatic doors closed behind him, and then she exhaled through her nose and picked up her clipboard and went back to work. But her jaw was tight in a way it hadn't been 20 minutes ago, and the young nursing student trailing her on rounds that afternoon, a 22-year-old named Priya, who was still in the phase of her training where the hospital felt like an institution of pure healing and good intentions, looked at Rena's face and said quietly, Does that happen a lot? Rena said, More than it should. She did not tell the man in the corridor. She made that choice deliberately, consciously, because she had taken one look at Jack Calloway sitting on that floor with that child leaning against him and decided without being asked that he did not need one more thing to carry right now. There were things you protected people from when you could. This was one of those times. Jack didn't know about the man in the button-down. But he knew something was wrong the moment Emily lifted her head. She had been still against his arm for close to 10 minutes, not asleep. Just quiet, that deep child quiet that is neither peace nor resignation, but something in between, a body conserving what it has left. And then suddenly she sat up straight and turned toward Bay 3 and said, Something happened. Jack looked at her. What do you mean? The sounds changed. She was already on her feet. The machine sounds, they changed. He listened. He was not a medical professional. He could not have articulated what she heard, but she was already moving toward the bay, and he was on his feet behind her, and when they reached the curtain, a nurse was coming out fast, not running, but moving with the kind of velocity that was one step below running the maximum speed a professional allows themselves in a corridor before it becomes panic. What's happening? Emily said. The nurse, not Rena, a younger one, dark ponytail, focused eyes, looked at her and said, The doctor is with her. She's being taken care of. That's not what I asked, Emily said. The nurse stopped. She looked at this 7-year-old who had said, That's not what I asked, with the calm directness of an adult, and something in her expression shifted from professional deflection to genuine recognition. Her blood pressure dropped again, she said. We're adjusting her medication. Dr. Okafor is with her. He is very good at this. She paused. I promise you he is very good at this. Emily held the nurse's eyes for a moment, measuring the truth in them with that instrument children have that is more accurate than any lie detector. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. The nurse went. Emily stood at the curtain. She didn't push through it. She stood with her hand resting against the fabric, and Jack watched her make the decision. The adult decision, the agonizing one, not to go in and disrupt the people who were trying to save her mother, even though every instinct in her body was screaming to push through and hold that hand again. She pressed her palm flat against the curtain and kept it there like a signal, like a hand reaching through a wall. Jack put his hand on her shoulder. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Dex appeared at the end of the corridor, walking toward them with 2 cups of vending machine coffee, which he held out to Jack. Jack took one. Dex looked at Emily and then went back down the corridor and came back 2 minutes later with a pack of peanut butter crackers from the vending machine, which he held out to her without ceremony. She looked at them, then she looked up at him. I'm not hungry. I know, he said. Eat them anyway. Your body's been running on fear for 3 hours. Feed it something else. She took the crackers. Dex leaned against the wall beside Jack and said quietly, Marcus wants to know how long we're staying. Until we know she's stable, Jack said. That could be hours. Then it's ours. Dex nodded. He did not argue. He had known Jack long enough to understand that when Jack used that tone, the conversation about the subject was over, and the only remaining question was logistics. I'll tell the guys, he said. Tell them they can rotate out if they want. Get food. Nobody has to stay. Nobody's going anywhere, Dex said, and walked away. Emily had opened the crackers and was eating them mechanically, one small bite at a time, staring at the curtain. Jack watched her out of the corner of his eye. She had the look of a child who was holding herself together by a specific act of will, the look of someone who had decided they were not going to break and was now simply executing that decision 1 minute at a time. He had worn that same look before. He knew exactly how much it cost. "Hey," he said. She looked up. "Tell me about her," he said. "Your mom. Tell me something." Emily blinked. Of all the things she might have expected him to say, this was not one of them. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want her to tell me." She thought for a moment. Then she said, "She sings when she cooks, not real singing, just kind of humming and sometimes the words, but she doesn't always know the real words, so she makes them up. It's really embarrassing." A pause. "I tell her it's embarrassing, but I actually—" She stopped, swallowed. "I actually really like it." Jack nodded. "She works really hard," Emily continued, and her voice was careful now, the way a person's voice is careful when they are carrying something fragile. "She works all the time. She says it's so we can have a good life. But I think," she hesitated, "I think she also works so she doesn't have to think about how tired she is. Does that make sense?" "Yeah," Jack said, "it does." "She never asks anyone for help." Emily's voice went somewhere quieter. "She thinks asking for help means you're losing, like it's a contest, and if you ask for help, you lose a point." Jack looked at her. Something about that sentence landed on him with a specific weight. He understood it from the inside. "She's not losing," he said. "Getting help isn't losing. You're not losing when the thing you're up against is bigger than one person can handle alone." Emily looked at him steadily. "That's not what she thinks." "I know," he said. "A lot of people think that. It doesn't make it true." She considered him for a long moment. Then she said, "Is that something you had to figure out too?" The question surprised him. He opened his mouth, closed it. He was not accustomed to being read accurately by anyone, let alone a second grader. "Yeah," he said finally. "Took me longer than it should have." "How long?" "About 30 years too long." She nodded as though this was exactly the answer she'd expected. Then she went back to her crackers and her vigil at the curtain, and Jack went back to his coffee, and the corridor continued its rhythm around them. It was another 40 minutes before Dr. Okafor came out. He came through the curtain with the unhurried movement of a man who was tired but not defeated, and he looked at Emily. First, the way good doctors always look at the family member first, because the family member is the one who has been waiting in the dark. "She's stable," he said. Emily made a sound, not a word, just a sound very small that came from somewhere below language, from the place where relief lives before it becomes anything articulate. "Her blood pressure is coming up. We've got antibiotics running and we're managing the infection aggressively. The next 6 hours are still important, but she's responding." He crouched in front of Emily the way Jack had crouched on the sidewalk, deliberately fully making himself small to meet her. "She's awake. She's asking for you." Emily was through the curtain before he finished the sentence. Jack stood in the corridor. He heard it before he could stop himself from hearing it, the sound from inside the bay. Sarah's voice, weak and rough, saying Emily's name, and Emily's voice answering it, and then a long silence that was not really silence at all, but the sound of two people holding each other in a hospital bed, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. Dr. Okafor stood up and looked at Jack. He looked at the leather vest, the patches, the road-worn hands. He said, "You brought her in, so yes. She would have been in serious trouble if you'd waited for EMS. The traffic was backed up 3 blocks. It would have been at least 20 minutes. Jack said nothing. "I'm not saying you should make a habit of transporting septic patients," Okafor said with the slight wry edge of a man who knew the line between protocol and reality was not always where the manual said it was. "I'm saying in this specific case it was the right call." He paused. "Thank you." Jack nodded once. Okafor started to turn away, then stopped. "The little girl, Emily, she's been alone with this for a while, hasn't she?" "Looks like it," Jack said. "She knew her mother's symptoms better than half the adults I see in here. She knew how long it had been going on. She knew the arm. She knew the fever pattern." He shook his head. 7 years old, carrying all of that. "She's a tough kid," Jack said. "Too tough for 7, Okafor said quietly. "That's not a compliment. That's a diagnosis." And then he walked away down the corridor, already moving toward the next thing, the next bay, the next person who needed him. Jack stood with that for a moment, too tough for seven. He understood that too. He had known kids like that. He had been a kid like that. He knew what it cost. He knew what it built and what it broke simultaneously, the architecture of a childhood spent being the most capable person in the room when you should have been allowed to be the least. He turned and walked toward the front entrance. He needed air. He needed 5 minutes of something that was not the specific density of a hospital corridor, not the antiseptic smell, and the particular quality of fluorescent light that flattened everything it touched. He pushed through the doors. Marcus was outside. Marcus was always outside when Jack needed someone to be there. This had been true for 23 years, and Jack had stopped questioning it. The older man was leaning against his bike with his arms crossed and his eyes on the street, and he straightened slightly when Jack came out. "She's stable," Marcus said. "Yeah. Good." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Then we've got a problem." Jack looked at him. "That video," Marcus said. "The contractor filmed it, but it wasn't just him. There were 3 other people on that sidewalk with phones. One of them posted it 40 minutes ago." He held out his own phone. Jack took it. The video was 47 seconds long. It had been shot from across the street, shaky the way amateur footage always was, but it was clear enough. Clear enough to see Emily screaming. Clear enough to see the contractors not moving. Clear enough to see 5 motorcycles arrive and 5 men get off them, and Jack walking to Emily and crouching down, and then the group of them moving away toward the car. The caption read, "Little girl screaming outside St. Vincent's. Nobody helped her until these guys showed up." "Share this." Jack looked at the number in the corner. He handed the phone back. 43,000 shares in 40 minutes. "It's moving fast," Marcus said. "I see that. There's a news van across the street. Showed up about 10 minutes ago." Jack turned. There it was. A white van with a satellite dish on top and a woman in a blazer standing in front of it talking to a man with a camera on his shoulder, both of them looking at the hospital entrance. Jack said one word. "No." "They're going to want to talk to you." "No." "Jack, that woman in there did not ask to be on television," Jack said. "Her daughter did not ask to be on the television. Whatever happened today," he stopped, chose his words. "It doesn't belong to the news. It belongs to them." Marcus studied him. "You know they're going to report it anyway." "Then they'll report it without my help." Marcus nodded slowly. He understood the particular privacy of having done something real, the difference between a thing that happened and a thing that gets performed for consumption. "The hospital's going to get questions," he said. "The hospital can handle questions. That's their job." Jack looked at the news van again. "Our job was today. Today is done." "Almost done," Marcus said with a particular inflection. Jack looked at him. "You haven't said goodbye to the kid yet." Jack was quiet for a moment. He looked at the doors. He looked at Marcus. He said, "She's with her mom. She'll want to know you're leaving." He didn't answer right away. There was something in him that resisted this, not the sentiment of it, but the implications, the idea that his leaving required a goodbye, that he had become someone to that child in the space of a few hours, that she would notice his absence. He was not accustomed to being noticed. He was accustomed to being seen as a function, a force, a presence that resolved things and moved on. But Emily had asked his name, and she had leaned against his arm. He went back inside. She was still in the bay with her mother. The curtain was half open now. The crisis state urgency of earlier replaced with the steadier hum of monitoring maintenance watch and wait. Sarah was propped slightly upright against the pillow, an IV line in her right arm. Monitors attached her color still wrong, but less terribly wrong than it had been. Emily was sitting in the chair beside the bed, her hand in her mother's, talking about something in a low voice. She looked up when she heard his boots on the linoleum. "You're leaving," she said, not a question. "Yeah," Jack said. Sarah looked at him. This was the first time she had seen him clearly from a position of partial consciousness rather than complete collapse. And she looked at him the way someone looks at a figure from a dream they're trying to reconstruct, searching for the parts that matched what she almost remembered. Her voice came out rough, not fully there yet, but present. "You're the one who carried me." "Yes, ma'am." Sarah Carter was not a woman who cried easily. She had not cried at the warehouse when she fell, had not cried when she lay against the car window, drifting in and out, had not even cried when she first woke up in the bay and understood where she was. But something about the simplicity of his "yes, ma'am," the complete lack of performance in it, made her eyes fill. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," he said. "She found you," Sarah said, looking at Emily. I told her not to go far." "I went exactly as far as I needed to go," Emily said without apology, and Sarah made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, the particular combination that only exists at the intersection of terror and relief. Jack looked at Emily. She had gotten out of the chair and come to stand in front of him, and she was doing that thing again, that inventory, that systematic assessment. She was looking at him the way she had looked at those three contractors, without flinching, without softening the question her eyes were asking. But the question was different now. Then it had been, "Will you help?" Now it was, "Will I see you again?" He reached into the inside pocket of his vest. He pulled out his wallet. He took from it everything that was in the cash section. He didn't count it. He didn't look at it. He folded it once and held it out to Emily. She looked at it. She looked at him. "That's a lot of money." "It'll help with the bills," he said, "and for your mom." "We can't take your money," Sarah said from the bed, and her voice had gathered some strength. In it, now the automatic reflex of a woman who had been taking care of herself for too long to let someone else do it without resistance. "Ma'am," Jack said, turning to look at her, "you can argue with me about it when you're better. Right now, Emily's going to take it, and you're going to rest." He held her eyes long enough for her to understand that this, like the carrying, was not a negotiation. Then he looked back at Emily. She took the money from his hand. She looked at it. She looked up at him. She said, "You're the bravest person who helped us today." He almost smiled. He didn't quite make it all the way there, but he almost did. "You're the one who screamed loud enough for us to hear you," he said. "I just followed the sound." She stepped forward and wrapped both arms around his midsection, her face pressed against the leather of his vest, and held on. He stood still for exactly 1 second, the second it took for his armor to register what was happening and decide to let it, and then he put one hand on her back between her shoulder blades and held her back. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then she stepped away and looked up at him with clear, dry eyes. "Thank you, Jack," she said. "Take care of her," he said, "and take care of yourself." He turned and walked back through the bay, curtained down the corridor past Rena's station. Rena looked up and gave him a nod that carried more meaning than most speeches, and through the automatic doors and out into the heat of the afternoon. Marcus was waiting. The others were there by the bikes in the loose, unbothered way they always gathered, as though time in this kind of situation was a thing they'd agreed not to count. Jack put on his helmet. He threw his leg over his seat. "She okay?" Danny asked. "She'll make it," Jack said. Dex mounted his bike. Marcus did the same. One by one, the engines turned over that bass gathering, that sound that the street knew. But before Jack turned his own engine, he sat still for a moment. He was looking at the hospital front, at the glass doors, at the building that held inside it a woman fighting to stay alive, and a little girl in broken lace sneakers who had run 2 blocks on burning pavement and screamed until the ground shook. He thought about what Okafor had said. Too tough for 7. He thought about his own 7. He thought about the things he had been too tough for at that age, the things nobody had come running for, the times he had screamed the equivalent of what Emily had screamed, and the street had not answered. He thought about how long it had taken him to stop being angry about that. He thought about how maybe some of the riding, some of the miles, some of the particular code he had built his life around, maybe some of it was the answer he had constructed in the absence of being answered. The decision made slowly over decades to be the kind of presence in the world that he had needed and not found when he was small. It was not a thought he would have shared with anyone. It was a private arithmetic, the kind you do alone. He turned the engine over, and the Hells Angels rolled out of the hospital approach and into the burning Phoenix afternoon, and the sound of them was large and unmistakable. And then gradually by degrees it faded until the street outside St. Vincent Medical Center was just a street again, holding the echo of something that had happened there, something that would not be easy to explain to anyone who hadn't seen it, something that Nurse Rena would tell her daughter about that night, and that the woman with the stroller would tell her husband, and that 43,000 people had already shared without understanding the full weight of what they were passing along. Inside, Emily Carter sat back down in the chair beside her mother's bed. She took her mother's hand. Sarah's eyes were closed, her breathing steadier now, her body surrendering to the medication and the care and the simple relief of being in a place where someone was watching over her. Emily looked at the folded bills in her other hand. She unfolded them slowly. She looked at the number. Her eyes went wide. She folded them back up very carefully and put them in the front pocket of her jeans, the one with the button, the one she used for things she needed to not lose. She held her mother's hand. She did not cry. She sat in the chair that was too big for her, and she breathed in and out, matching the rhythm of the monitor, counting the breaths her mother took, each one a small, ordinary miracle. Each one proof that the worst had not happened, that the street had answered, that the 7-year-old girl who had run barefoot on burning asphalt had run in the right direction. Outside, somewhere down the road, the engines faded to nothing, and Sarah Carter breathed. The video hit 200,000 shares by midnight. Emily didn't know that yet. She was asleep in the chair beside her mother's bed, her head tipped sideways against her own shoulder, her hand still loosely wrapped around Sarah's fingers, the way a child's hand holds something even in sleep, not gripping, just present, maintaining contact, the way a compass needle maintains north. She had not meant to fall asleep. She had been counting her mother's breaths one after another, and somewhere around breath 400, she had simply stopped being awake. Sarah knew the moment Emily dropped off. She felt a slight change in the pressure of the small hand in hers, the way the fingers went loose and trusting, and she lay still and looked at the ceiling and let herself feel the full weight of the last 12 hours without the armor she'd been wearing to protect her daughter from it. It was heavy. God, it was heavy. She thought about the warehouse. She thought about Tuesday morning, the granola bar, the fluorescent light swinging. She thought about the car, the steering wheel going wrong under her hands, the white at the edges of her vision. She thought about what Denise had said, "You are on fire," and how she had talked her out of calling 911 because of a copay, because of a number, because she had spent so many years calculating the cost of everything, running the arithmetic of survival so constantly that it had become automatic. And somewhere in that automation, she had stopped calculating her own value into the equation. She looked at Emily's sleeping face. Her daughter had run 2 blocks barefoot on burning asphalt and screamed until strangers stopped walking. Her daughter had looked at 3 grown men who outweighed her by a combined 600 pounds and refused to be dismissed. Her daughter had, by every measure that actually mattered, saved her life. 7 years old. Sarah closed her eyes. She felt the IV line in her arm, the compression cuff inflating and deflating on her wrist in its regular rhythm, the cool air of the bay against her face. She felt the particular quality of being alive after having been very close to not being alive, which was not dramatic the way movies made it seem. It was quiet. It was the feeling of ordinary things, a breath, a heartbeat, the weight of a blanket becoming suddenly completely astonishing. She was crying before she realized it, not loudly, just leaking the way a container leaks when the pressure finally exceeds what it was built to hold. She pressed her free hand over her mouth, and she let it happen, and she did not wake Emily up. She was still crying quietly when Nurse Rena came in for her 11 o'clock check. Rena took one look at her and did not reach for the clipboard. She pulled the rolling stool from the corner and sat down beside the bed, close, but not crowding, and said in the low voice of someone who understood the difference between privacy and aloneness, "You need to talk," or "You need quiet." Sarah lowered her hand from her mouth. She looked at this woman she had never met before today, this broad-faced woman with 20 years of emergency behind her eyes, and said, "I almost left her alone." Rena said nothing. She let the sentence exist. "She's 7, Sarah continued, her voice breaking around the number. If today had gone differently, she would have been alone. There's no one else. Her fathers have been gone since she was 3. My mom is in Flagstaff, and we're not." She stopped, started again. "There's no one. It would have been just her." "But it didn't go that way," Rena said. "Because she ran," Sarah said. "Because my 7-year-old did the thing I was too stubborn to do. She asked for help." She looked at the ceiling again. "I taught her that, not on purpose. But I taught it to her the way I never asked anyone, never said anything was wrong, and always said, 'Fine, fine, it's fine.' She learned that from watching me, Baram. And then today, she unlearned it herself, and it saved my life, and the tears came back. I don't know what to do with that." Rena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You do know what to do with it." Sarah looked at her. "You already know," Rena said simply. That's why you're crying about it at 11 o'clock instead of in the morning, because you already understand what it means and what it's going to ask of you. She paused. The question isn't what to do. The question is whether you're going to be brave enough to do it. Sarah looked at her daughter's sleeping face. She's braver than me. Right now, maybe, Rena said, but she learned it somewhere. Kids don't build courage out of nothing. She watched you work double shifts and keep going. She watched you hold things together. She doesn't know the word for it yet, but she knows what it looks like. She stood up, picked up the clipboard, began her check. Let her be brave for you today. Tomorrow you can go back to being brave for her. That's how it works when you let people in. Sarah didn't answer. But when Rena left, the crying had changed, not stopped, but shifted into something less like collapse and more like release, the difference between a dam breaking and a river being let to run. She was still awake at midnight when Dr. Okafor came in for his own check, and he looked at her numbers and said, better, significantly better. You're going to be here a few days, but you're going to be here. He said it the way doctors say things they mean, specifically not as comfort, but as information, because he understood that she was the kind of person who needed information more than she needed comfort. She said, my daughter, is there somewhere she can sleep that isn't a chair? I'll find out, he said, and he did, and 20 minutes later, a social worker named Gail arrived. Kind practical, carrying a folded blanket and a pillow, and negotiated Emily from the chair to a small cot that a nurse brought in from a supply room, and Emily moved through all of this without truly waking the deep animal sleep of a child who has spent everything she had. Sarah watched her daughter get settled onto the cot. She watched Gail pull the blanket up to Emily's shoulder with the matter-of-fact gentleness of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She thought about what that social worker's job looked like on the hardest days, all the children in all the hallways, all the small people waiting, and she said quietly, thank you. Gail looked at her. She's a remarkable kid. I know, Sarah said. I need to do better by her. Gail looked at her for a moment longer than a simple, well-meaning pause would require. Then she took a card from her pocket and set it on the bedside table. When you're out of here, she said, call me. There are resources, real ones, not pamphlets, actual help. You don't have to do this the way you've been doing it. Sarah picked up the card. She held it. She put it in the folded edge of her pillow where she would not lose it. She closed her eyes. She listened to her daughter breathe. She let the machines do their work. She slept. The morning arrived the way mornings arrive in hospitals, not with sunlight, but with a shift change, the change in voices at the nurse's station, the breakfast cart in the corridor, the particular rhythm of a building coming back to full operational speed. Emily was awake before her mother, sitting up on the cot and looking around the bay with the disoriented alertness of someone who had forgotten for half a second where they were and then remembered all at once. She looked at Sarah. Sarah was sleeping, genuinely sleeping, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Her color changed overnight from the terrible gray of the car to something closer to human, not healthy yet, but moving in that direction. Emily watched her for a moment with the specific intensity of someone taking inventory of something precious they had almost lost. Then she put her feet on the floor and went to find Rena. Rena was at her station end of a 12-hour shift, running on her third coffee, and she looked up when she heard the small sneakers on the linoleum and said, morning, how'd you sleep? Okay, Emily said. How's my mom? Better than last night. Dr. Okafor is going to come by around 9 and talk to her. Her numbers improved a lot. Emily exhaled. The exhale was enormous for such a small body, the kind that contains hours of held tension. Okay, she said. Good. Then she said, can I ask you something? Sure. That man who helped us yesterday, Jack, did he leave a number? Like, how do I find him again? Rena looked at her. Did he give you any contact information? No, he just said goodbye and left. Emily paused. I want to say thank you properly. My mom would want to say thank you. Not just, I said thank you, but it wasn't enough. It didn't feel like enough. Rena was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about the news van that had been outside until 10 last night. The 57 missed calls on the hospital's media line, the administrator, who had come by at 8 this morning, already managing the PR of the situation. She was thinking about 43,000 shares, becoming by this morning closer to 200,000. She was thinking about all the moving parts of what had happened yesterday, that were now in motion in the world, rolling outward, picking up speed in the way that real things do when they catch on something true in people. I don't have his information, she said honestly, but I have a feeling he's not going to be hard to find. She looked at Emily steadily. The world knows what happened here yesterday. It's moving fast. Emily frowned slightly. What do you mean? Rena turned her monitor slightly so Emily could see the screen. She had pulled up one of the news sites that had picked up the story. The still image from the video was there, grainy, taken from across the street, but clear enough. Emily on the pavement, the three contractors at the door, the motorcycles arriving. The headline read, "Nobody moved until they did. Child's cry draws Hell's Angels to Phoenix Hospital in viral video." Emily stared at it. She stared at the image of herself, the small figure on the pavement, and she had the strange, dislocating experience of seeing herself from the outside, of understanding that other people had witnessed the things she had lived through from a distance she could not herself access. "That's me," she said. "Yes," Rena said. "How many people saw it?" Rena looked at the number in the corner of the article. She said, "A lot, honey." Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "They didn't help when they were there, but they're sharing it now." The observation landed on Rena with the force of something much heavier than the age of the person delivering it. She opened her mouth and closed it again because there was no clean answer to that. It was true, and it was complicated, and it was the kind of thing that said something about human beings that was not entirely comfortable, the way witnessing at a safe distance was easier than witnessing in person, the way a screen made the instinct to help feel resolved when it wasn't. "People are complicated," Rena finally said. "But some of them are going to see that and do better next time. That counts for something." Emily thought about this with the seriousness she gave everything. "Maybe," she said. The morning moved. Sarah woke at 8:15, reached immediately for Emily, and found her already there. They did not speak for the first few minutes. They simply existed together in the small space of the bay, Sarah's hand in Emily's, both of them on the right side of the worst that could have happened, adjusting to the territory of relief. The way you adjust to any new landscape, slowly, carefully looking at it from different angles to make sure it was real. Dr. Okafor arrived at 9 sharp. He was freshly slept, sharp-eyed, and moved through his assessment with the efficiency of a man who had 40 other patients in the discipline to give each of them complete attention anyway. He looked at Sarah's arm, looked at her numbers, looked at her face. "The infection is responding," he said. "We're not out of the woods. I want 3 more days, minimum, maybe 4. The sepsis protocol needs to run its full course, but the trajectory is good." He paused. "You understand how close this was?" "Yes," Sarah said. 3 more days, and you probably weren't conscious enough to make decisions. A week and we're having a different conversation." He looked at her without flinching. "You knew something was wrong." "I knew. And you waited." "I had to work," she said. And then, because the honesty of the night before was still in her, because Rena had said brave enough to do it, and she was trying to be, and I didn't want to need help. Okafor nodded, not judgmentally. "I see it more than you'd think," he said. "People who work too hard and trust too little and run on empty until the body makes the decision for them." He looked at Emily briefly, then back at Sarah. "You've got a daughter who has different instincts than you do. I'd listen to her." "I plan to," Sarah said. He left. The room settled. And then Gail, the social worker from the night before, came back this time with a different energy, something that made Sarah sit up straighter, and Emily put down the hospital breakfast tree she'd been picking at. "There's something happening outside," Gail said carefully. "I want to make sure you know about it before anyone else tells you." Sarah looked at her. "What kind of something?" "The video of yesterday, it's very large now. The news is outside. There are people," she paused, choosing words, "there are people who came to the hospital this morning. Not patients, just people who saw the video and came. Some of them brought things." "What kind of things?" Emily said. "Flowers, some food. One woman brought a card with money in it. There's a man outside who said he drove in from Tucson." Gail stopped. "And the hospital administrator wants to speak with you about the contractors, about what happened at the door yesterday." The silence in the bay changed temperature. Sarah said, "The men who blocked us." "The hospital is conducting an internal review," Gail said. The contracting company has already put out a statement. It's the situation is being taken seriously. Sarah looked at Emily. Emily was looking back at her with an expression that was hard to read. Not satisfaction, not anger. Something more layered than either the look of a child processing the gap between a thing that felt wrong in the moment and the world's delayed recognition that it was wrong. Too late, Emily said quietly. Not bitterly, just as a statement of fact. Emily, Sarah started. I'm not mad, Emily said. I just mean they didn't help when it mattered. Now everybody's sorry. That's not the same as helping. Gail looked at this 7-year-old and had the same experience that Rena had had, that Okafor had had, that Jack Calloway had had, the slightly vertiginous sensation of being outthought by someone who came up to your elbow. Sarah said, no, baby. It's not the same. You're right. She squeezed Emily's hand. But some things change because of moments like yesterday. Not all things, but some. She paused. That matters too, even if it's not enough. Emily considered this. Then she nodded, once the nod of someone filing a position they haven't fully resolved but are willing to sit with. The administrator came and went. He was apologetic in the specific way that institutions are apologetic, focused on policy, language, on review processes, on the steps being taken. And Sarah listened and said little, and Emily said nothing and looked at the wall. And when he was gone, Sarah let out a breath that said everything she hadn't said to his face. Then at 11:47 in the morning, exactly 24 hours after Sarah had collapsed on the warehouse breakroom floor, the door of the bay opened and Rena looked in and said, there's someone here. He says he doesn't want to be on camera or in the news and he didn't call ahead. He says he just came to check. She paused. He's wearing a leather vest. Emily was on her feet before Rena finished the sentence. She was through the bay door and into the corridor, and she stopped when she saw him. Jack was standing at the far end of the hall. Same vest, same boots, looking like someone who had thought about not coming and come anyway, which was exactly what had happened. He had seen the news van outside. He had told Marcus to park 2 streets over. He had walked in through the side entrance and asked for Rena by name because she had struck him as someone who would tell him the truth about the situation without making it into something it didn't need to be. Emily walked toward him. He watched her come. She stopped in front of him and looked up at him and said, I didn't think you were coming back. I wasn't, he said, and then I was. Why? He looked at her. He thought about the drive over, about the specific unease that had sat in him through the night and into the morning. Not guilt exactly, not worry, but a kind of attachment. He hadn't authorized a concern that had installed itself without permission. He had kept thinking about too tough for 7. He had kept thinking about the broken lace on her sneaker. He had kept thinking about the way she had pressed her palm flat against the bay curtain. Wanted to make sure the ending was a good one, he said. Emily looked at him steadily. My mom is getting better. Good. The video is everywhere. I know. People are outside. Some of them drove from Tucson. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but had some of the same architecture. That's a long drive. Are you okay? She said. The question stopped him. He looked at her. Am I okay? People are saying a lot of things about you online. Some of them are nice. Some of them are, she paused, selecting her word carefully, complicated. He shook his head. I don't look at that stuff. Good, she said. I don't think you should. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she reached out and took his hand, not his fingers this time, his whole hand, her small fingers wrapping around his palm, and said, come say hi to my mom. She has things she wants to say to you, and I don't think she should have to wait any longer to say them. He let her lead him down the corridor. And Jack Calloway, who had ridden hard roads for 29 years and developed a specific, practiced, functional relationship with solitude, who had learned to move through the world as a force rather than a person, as a presence rather than a participant, walked down a hospital hallway holding a 7-year-old girl's hand, and he did not resist it, and he did not analyze it, and he did not look for the exit. He just walked. Sarah was sitting up when they came through the bay door. She had known he was coming. Emily had burst back in to announce it 30 seconds before, and she had used those 30 seconds to pull herself as upright as the IV line, and the monitoring cords allowed to smooth her hair back with her free hand to prepare herself for the conversation she had been rehearsing in her head since she woke up this morning. She had words ready. Thank you, and I don't know how. And my daughter told me, and I will never be able to repay. But when he walked through the door and she saw him in full standing in the entrance of the bay, with Emily's hand in his, looking at her with the same quiet directness he'd probably looked at everything with since he was 20 years old, the prepared words dissolved. She was left with the only ones that were actually true. She said you were scary looking, Sarah said. Jack looked at Emily. Emily shrugged. I also said you didn't feel scary. She told me that too, he said. Sarah looked at him. Her eyes were filling again, and she had decided this morning that she was done being embarrassed about that, done managing her face for other people's comfort. You carried me, she said. You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything. And you carried me like I mattered. He held her gaze. He said, you do matter. A lot of people didn't act like it yesterday. A lot of people make that mistake, he said. About a lot of people. She pressed her lips together. She breathed. She said, Emily told me what you said to her, on the floor, about asking for help. She paused. I've been thinking about it all night. He waited. I'm going to try, she said, to be different about that. She looked at Emily, then back at him. I don't want her learning my worst habits. She's got enough of her own to figure out. Emily said, I don't have bad habits. You told a strange man he was scary looking within 5 minutes of meeting him, Sarah said. He was. Jack did something then that neither of them had seen him do yet. He smiled. Not a small, almost smile, not the shadow of one, but a real one, full and sudden, that changed his whole face and made him look for one unguarded moment like a different man than the one who had stepped off that motorcycle yesterday. Like the man he might have been in a version of his life where fewer hard things had happened. Like someone who was underneath all the armor, genuinely glad to be in this specific room, in this specific moment, with these two specific people. Emily pointed at him. See, she said to her mother, he has a good smile. I knew he did. Sarah laughed. It hurt her arm and she didn't care. She laughed and Jack was still smiling, and for 30 seconds the bay was just 3 people in a room, not a viral video, not a news story, not a symbol of anything larger than itself. Just a woman healing a child next to her and a man who had driven over without being asked because he wanted to know the ending was a good one. Outside the hospital, the news van was still there. The people from Tucson were still there. The world was still doing what it does with the things it witnesses, sorting, labeling, arguing, sharing, flattening the human into the headline. Inside Bay 3, none of that existed yet. It would. Sarah knew it would. There would be decisions to make about what to say and who to talk to and what this story was allowed to become. There would be the practical weight of everything, the bills, the job, the 3 days minimum in this bed, the conversation with her supervisor that she had been avoiding since Tuesday morning. There would be the long work of becoming the person she had told Jack she was going to try to be. None of that was resolved. None of it was going to be easy. But right now, her daughter was next to her, and the man who had carried her was in the room, and her heart was beating in the steady, unremarkable rhythm of a person who was alive. Right now was enough. Right now was more than enough. Right now was in the specific mathematics of how close things had come to going the other way. Everything. Emily climbed back onto the cot and pulled the blanket around her legs and looked at Jack, who had taken the rolling stool in the corner, and said, Are you hungry? I didn't eat all my breakfast. Jack looked at the tray. What is it? Scrambled eggs and toast. The eggs are not great. How's the toast? The toast is okay. He reached for the toast. Emily watched him eat it with the satisfaction of someone providing for a person they have decided to take care of, which was, Sarah realized, watching them, exactly what her daughter was doing. Taking care of him. In her small, serious way, in the only currency she currently had available, offering what she had. Sarah closed her eyes. She let herself rest. She listened to her daughter talk, and she listened to the quiet, low responses of the man on the stool, and she thought about a world that walked past a screaming child on burning asphalt, and she thought about the sound of engines that answered anyway, and she thought about what it meant that the thing that had saved her life was not a system or a protocol or an institution, but a little girl's refusal to accept that no one would come, and the fact that someone did. Jack left at noon. He did not make a production of it. He finished the toast, sat with them for another 30 minutes while Emily talked about school, about her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who said she was a strong reader about the fact that the sneakers with the broken lace were her favorite pair, and she was worried about them because she had left them somewhere in the hospital corridor the night before and couldn't find them. And then he stood up and said he had to go. And Sarah looked at him and said, "Will we see you again?" And he said, "Yeah, you will." And he meant it, and she could tell he meant it, and that was enough. Emily walked him to the elevator. She stood beside him while they waited for it and said without looking at him, "You're not just saying that, right, about seeing us again?" "No," he said, "because people say things sometimes and they don't mean them, and I can usually tell, but I want to make sure." "I'm not people," he said. She looked up at him. "No," she said, "you're not." The elevator opened. He stepped in. He turned around and looked at her, standing in the corridor. In her socks, the sneakers had been found wedged under the cot and were now back on her feet, broken lace and all. And she looked back at him with those hazel eyes that saw everything, and neither of them said anything for the 2 seconds before the doors closed. It was enough. He walked out through the side entrance, past the people gathered outside who didn't know what he looked like. Without the context of the video, grainy taken from distance, and he made it to the street where Marcus had parked, and Marcus handed him his helmet without a word, and they rode. He didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Marcus didn't ask him to. That was the agreement they had always had unspoken. Unwritten, the agreement of men who understood that some things needed to be ridden through before they could be talked about. Finally, Jack said over the comm, "She's going to be okay." "I know," Marcus said. "You checked?" "Okafor is good. She's responding." "Not talking about the mom," Marcus said. Jack was quiet for a long moment. The road moved under them, the heat pressing down the city, giving way at the edges to the flat open spread of the Arizona landscape, wide and unsparing and honest. "Yeah," he said finally. "She's going to be okay too." Marcus said nothing else. He didn't need to. 3 days passed. Sarah Carter learned over those 3 days that asking for help was not a single decision, but a practice, something you had to do again and again until it stopped feeling like defeat. Gail, the social worker, came back on Thursday with a folder, real things as she had promised, not pamphlets. A patient assistance program that would cover 60% of the hospital bill. A community health clinic 2 miles from Sarah's apartment that operated on a sliding scale. The name of an employment attorney who took cases on contingency, which Gail mentioned carefully without pressure, because what had happened at the hospital entrance was, in her professional assessment, something that merited a conversation with someone whose job was to know what rights looked like in practice. Sarah took the folder. She took it the way she had taken Gail's card on the first night, with both hands, the specific body language of someone accepting help for the first time in so long that the gesture itself was unfamiliar. She said thank you, and she meant it in a way that went below the words. Emily watched her mother take the folder and felt something shift inside her chest. Not a dramatic shift. Quiet. The particular internal movement of a child who has been holding their breath for a long time and is slowly, carefully learning to exhale. On Friday morning, Dr. Okafor came in and looked at Sarah's arm and looked at her numbers and looked at her face and said, "Tomorrow." He said it simply the way he said everything. "One more night. Saturday morning you go home." Emily said, "Promise?" He looked at her. "I promise," he said. And he meant it, and she could tell, and she smiled, and it was the first full, unguarded smile she had produced in 4 days, all the teeth, the missing front one and all. And Dr. Okafor looked at it and felt beneath the professional exterior he wore as reliably as his white coat, something warm and uncomplicated moved through him. "You're a good doctor," Emily told him. "You're a good daughter," he said. She thought about that on and off for the rest of the day. Saturday morning arrived, and it kept its promise. Sarah was discharged at 9:47. She walked out through the same door she had been carried through 4 days earlier, her left arm in a compression sleeve, a bag of medications in her right hand, 2 weeks of follow-up appointments already scheduled on the phone that Gail had made sure was charged. She walked out under her own power, slowly but steadily, and Emily walked beside her, and they stood together on the pavement in the morning sun, and both of them breathed the outside air, and neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Emily said, "I need to call Mrs. Delgado. She's been feeding the cat." "We don't have a cat," Sarah said. "I know. I think she's been feeding a neighborhood cat and telling herself it's ours." Emily looked up at her. She's a little lonely. Sarah looked at her daughter, this person, this specific, extraordinary person she had made and raised, and apparently somewhere along the way significantly underestimated. When did you get so wise? She said. Emily shrugged. I've always been wise. You were busy. Sarah laughed. It still pulled at the arm and she still didn't care. She put her good arm around Emily's shoulders and they walked toward the cab that Gail had arranged, and the doors of St. Vincent Medical Center stayed open behind them, indifferent, already moving on to the next person who needed them. They were home by 10:30. The apartment was exactly as they had left it, which meant it was the apartment of a woman who had been running too hard for too long dishes. In the drying rack, Emily's homework on the kitchen table from Tuesday morning, the specific, slightly bare quality of a space that had been economized into functionality and not much beyond. Sarah stood in the middle of it and looked at it and made a decision, quiet and interior, that it would look different in a month. Not bigger, not more expensive, just more like somewhere people lived instead of somewhere someone survived. Emily was already at the kitchen table, pulling her Tuesday homework toward her, picking up a pencil. Sarah looked at her. You don't have to do that right now. I'm 4 days behind, Emily said. Mrs. Patterson is nice, but she does not let things slide. Emily. I'm fine, Mom. She looked up. Are you fine? I'm getting there, Sarah said. Good. Emily went back to her homework. There's soup in the cabinet, the tomato kind. You should eat it. Sarah made the soup. She sat at the table across from her daughter. They ate together in the comfortable quiet of two people who knew each other well enough to not fill every silence, the specific domestic piece of Tuesday morning homework in tomato soup, ordinary and fragile and completely irreplaceably precious. It was during lunch that Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification that was different from the others she had been ignoring all week. The news requests, the emails from people who had found her address through the video, the voicemails from numbers she didn't recognize. This one was from a number she did recognize because she had saved it before she left the hospital at Gail's suggestion. It was a text from Gail. It said, call me when you're settled. Something came in this morning you should know about. Sarah looked at it. She showed it to Emily. Emily looked at it and said, call her. I just got home. Mom. Sarah called her. Gail answered on the second ring and said, how are you feeling? Like I just got out of a hospital, Sarah said. What happened? A pause. The kind of pause that is not uncertainty but preparation, someone deciding how to deliver something large. The video, Gail said, it has 4 million shares as of this morning. Sarah put her hand flat on the table. Emily looked at her face and put her pencil down. 4 million, Sarah repeated. There's more, Gail said. A nonprofit organization called the Emergency Access Foundation. They work on hospital access and patient rights cases. They saw the video and they've been trying to reach you for 2 days. They want to talk to you, not for media purposes. They want to talk about the contractors, about what happened at that door. Another pause. Sarah, what those men did or didn't do has a name. It's called patient dumping adjacent conduct, and there's case law around it, and these people know it better than anyone. Sarah was quiet. I'm not telling you what to do, Gail said. I'm telling you what's available. There's also, she hesitated slightly, a fundraiser. Someone started it on the second day. I don't know who. It was shared with the video. As of this morning, it has raised $41,000. The number went through Sarah like electricity. What? 41,000? It's in an escrow account. It cannot be touched without your authorization. I have the contact for the fund administrator whenever you're ready. Sarah looked at Emily across the table. Emily was reading her face with that instrument of hers, that accurate Hazel receiver, and she could see it happening, could see her mother processing something enormous, something that was restructuring the interior architecture of a woman who had spent 34 years believing that the math of her life would always come out the same way. Why, Sarah said, not to Gail, just out loud. Why would that many people? Because they watched a little girl scream for her mother, Gail said gently, and they felt it. And most of them had walked past things just like it, and they knew it, and the knowing hurt. A pause. Sometimes people need to see the thing they didn't do so they can do the next thing. Sarah pressed 2 fingers against her eyes. She breathed. She said, I need to think about all of this. Of course, Gail said. Take the weekend. I'll be here Monday. She hung up. The kitchen was quiet. Emily was still looking at her. How much? Emily said. Sarah told her. Emily sat with that for a moment. Then she said, that's a lot of people. Yeah. I hope they feel better, Emily said. The ones who felt bad. Sarah looked at her. What do you mean? You know, the people who walked by when I was screaming, the ones outside the hospital? I hope they feel better now. I hope seeing the video made them feel like they helped because, she paused, looking for the right way to put it, because I don't want them to just feel bad forever. Feeling bad doesn't help anybody. Sarah stared at her daughter. She thought about Rena saying remarkable. She thought about Okafor saying too tough for 7. She thought about Jack on the floor saying you're the bravest person here. She thought about all these people who had looked at this child and seen something in her that Sarah had been too close, too tired, too busy surviving to fully see. She had made this person. Through all the double shifts and the thin months and the keeping things to herself and the formula of fine, fine. It's fine through all of it. Somehow she had made this person. This Emily who asked strange men for help and took their toast and told them they were scary looking and meant it as a compliment, who wanted 4 million strangers to feel better rather than worse, who sat at a kitchen table on a Saturday morning doing 4 days of missed homework because Mrs. Patterson was nice, but did not let things slide. Come here, Sarah said. Emily came around the table and Sarah pulled her in both arms, the bad one protesting faintly and being ignored. She held her daughter and she said into her hair, I love you. I don't say it enough. I'm going to say it more. Emily said from the region of Sarah's shoulder, I know you love me. I know you know. I want to say it anyway. Okay, Emily said, I love you too. A pause. Your soup is getting cold. Sarah laughed and let her go, and they sat back down and they finished their soup, and outside the apartment the city moved in its indifferent way, and the video kept moving through the world at a speed that neither of them could track or fully understand. It was 3 days later on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the Tuesday that had changed everything, that the second twist arrived, the one nobody saw coming. Emily was at school. Sarah was on the couch with her arm elevated, reading through the information from the Emergency Access Foundation, making notes in the margins the way she had once done with textbooks before life got in the way of that habit, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She had been letting unknowns go to voicemail all week, but something, some instinct, some small interior nudge made her pick up. Is this Sarah Carter? A woman's voice. Professional but not cold. Careful. Yes. My name is Patricia Odom. I'm the regional director of St. Vincent Medical Center. A pause. I want to apologize to you directly, not through a statement, not through a representative, directly person to person. Another pause. What happened to you and your daughter at that entrance last Tuesday was wrong. The men involved are no longer employed in any capacity connected to this hospital. I want you to know that the protocols that allowed that situation to occur are being rewritten, and that your case specifically has been used as the basis for that rewriting. Sarah held the phone and said nothing for a moment. I also want to tell you, Patricia Odom continued, that the hospital is waiving your bill, the full amount. It has been authorized at the board level. You will receive written confirmation this week. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. Why are you telling me this yourself, she said. Why not through Gail, or a letter, or... Because I watched the video, Patricia Odom said. I watched your daughter stand on that pavement and scream, and I know every layer of institutional responsibility that contributed to that moment. And I needed to be the one to tell you I'm sorry, because anything less than that would have been, she stopped. It would have been exactly the problem. The silence stretched between them, two women on opposite ends of a phone, connected by a Tuesday afternoon that neither of them would spend the rest of their lives forgetting. Sarah said, thank you for calling. Thank you for answering, Patricia said. She called Emily's school. She asked to have Emily pulled from class for 5 minutes, which the school agreed to because they had seen the news. When Emily came to the phone, Sarah could hear the classroom sounds behind her, the ambient hum of 20-something 7-year-olds, the world of school, which was its own entire universe, parallel and ongoing. Mom, is everything okay? Everything is okay, Sarah said. I just wanted to tell you something. What? The hospital bill. We don't have to pay it. Silence. Then Emily said, what about the fundraiser money? I don't know yet. We'll figure that out. We should give some of it to someone else, Emily said. Someone who needs it and doesn't have a video. Sarah closed her eyes. Yeah, she said. We will. Okay, Emily said. I have to go back. We're doing fractions. I know, go. Mom, Yetta. Yeah. I'm glad you answered the phone today. Sarah smiled, and it was the kind of smile that comes from somewhere deep, from the place below. Relief below gratitude, below even love, from the place where a person realizes completely and without qualification that they are exactly where they are supposed to be. Me too, baby, she said. Go do your fractions. Emily went. Sarah sat in the quiet of the apartment and let the week settle over her. Not the weight of it, but the shape of it, the way you look at a hard road behind you, not because you want to go back, but because you need to understand where you walked, what it gave you that you didn't have before. She thought about Jack. She thought about him riding out of the hospital approach with the Phoenix sun pressing down on all of them. And she thought about what it must have taken to build a life around the decision to stop when other people kept walking. She thought about the code underneath the leather and the reputation and the noise, the actual code, the one Emily had recognized before any adult in that parking lot had, that this was a man who saw the problem and didn't look for reasons it wasn't his. She thought about what Emily had said sitting in the hospital corridor. Angels, mommy, hell's angels. She had been right, not in the way the word was usually used, not the metaphor of it. In the actual operational sense, people who showed up when the calculation said not to, who moved toward the hard thing instead of away from it, who understood without being taught that a screaming child on burning asphalt was everyone's business, no protocol required. Jack called that evening. He said he had heard about the hospital director's call through Gail, who had heard through the network of people now loosely orbiting this story. He said he was glad. He said, how's the arm healing? She said. How's Emily? Teaching me things, Sarah said. Daily. He made the sound that was almost a laugh. Yeah, he said. That tracks. She wants to invite you for dinner, Sarah said. When I'm better, when things settle. A pause. Yeah. She said, and I'm quoting, he should have a real meal, not hospital toast. The laugh came all the way through this time full, and Sarah heard in it the same thing Emily had seen in his face that afternoon in the bay. The man underneath the armor, genuinely glad, genuinely present, genuinely somewhere he had not expected to be, and was not trying to leave. Tell her I'll be there, he said. She'll hold you to it, Sarah said. I'm counting on it, he said. He hung up. Sarah set the phone down on the cushion beside her. She sat in her apartment in the quiet of a Tuesday evening, listening to the ordinary sounds of the building around her, someone's television through the wall, the pipes settling the distant sound of traffic. And she felt for the first time in longer than she could remember that the ordinary sounds were enough, that the ordinary itself, this specific ordinary with its thin walls and its borrowed cat and its 4 days behind homework, and its daughter who told strangers they were scary looking, was not a waiting room for something better, but the thing itself, the actual thing. The video reached 6 million shares before the week was out. The contracting company issued a second statement, then a third. Octagon. The two contractors who had been most visible in the footage found themselves in the specific modern purgatory of people whose worst moment had been cataloged and distributed, and what they did with that, whether they carried it like a wound or like a lesson, was their own accounting to make, not Sarah's, not Emily's. Emily had said it clearly. She didn't want them to feel bad forever. Feeling bad didn't help anybody. What helped was the next choice, and the one after that, and the accumulation of better choices made by people who had seen the cost of worse ones. Dr. Okafor's hospital added new patient access protocols within 30 days. He sent Sarah a letter, not an email, a letter typed on hospital letterhead signed in his own handwriting that said the changes had been named informally by the staff who'd written them, the Carter Protocols. He said he thought she should know. She framed it. She hung it in the hallway where Emily would see it every day. Emily read it once. Then she said, oh, that's us, as Butter said, and that's us. We should tell Jack, Emily said. I will, Sarah said. Tell him at dinner, Emily said. Tell him in person. Things like that should be said in person. Sarah looked at her daughter. She thought about everything that had led to this specific moment, the 3 weeks of keeping it to herself, the warehouse floor, the car with the wheel up on the curb, the burning pavement, the screaming, the rumble that came from the west like weather. She thought about all the things that had to fail before the right thing could happen, and she thought about the small, impossible person in front of her who had refused to let the failure be the end of the story. She pulled Emily into her and held her and said, "When did you get so wise?" Emily said from her shoulder. "You asked me that already." And and the answer is still the same. "I've always been wise. You were just busy." A pause. "But you're not as busy anymore." "No," Sarah said. "I'm not." "Good," Emily said. "Pay attention then." Sarah held her tighter. She pressed her face into her daughter's hair, and she thought about how close it had come, how thin the margin between this moment and a version of it where there was no this moment at all. And she let herself feel the full terror of that, not to live in it, but to honor it, to let it do its work, to let it make the ordinary irreplaceable. Outside somewhere in the city, 5 motorcycles were parked, and the men who rode them were living their lives in the way they always had, not expecting acknowledgement, not needing it, moving through the world according to the code they'd built. From the accumulated wreckage and clarity of their years, they would not be in the newspaper tomorrow. They would not be on a morning show. They had not asked to be the center of anyone's story, and they were not. They were the hinge, the thing the story turned on, which is a different thing entirely. A hinge doesn't move. It makes movement possible. And that was what had happened on that Tuesday afternoon on the burning asphalt outside St. Vincent Medical Center. Not a miracle, not a movie, just a child who screamed loud enough and a man who heard her, and a decision made in the space of a single second to move toward the hard thing instead of away from it. Emily Carter had run 2 blocks barefoot and changed the direction of everything. She was 7 years old. She would be 8 in November. And she would spend the rest of her life knowing with the bone-deep certainty that only comes from having lived the proof of something, that the moment you stop waiting for the world to help you and start screaming for it, instead, that is the moment it turns around. Sometimes it sends the unlikely ones. Sometimes it sends the ones who look scary and don't feel it. Sometimes the angels wear leather. And sometimes the bravest person in the room is the smallest one standing barefoot on burning asphalt, refusing absolutely completely with her whole 7-year-old heart to be left alone.